The conference table felt like a courtroom, even though it wasn't. My attorney, Sandra Pruitt, sat to my left. My brother sat across from me with his lawyer, a slick man from Atlanta who wore shoes that probably cost more than my first truck. The mediator, a retired judge named Earl Whitfield, was reviewing some papers and hadn't looked up yet. Then my brother smiled at me. That calm, practiced smile he used in board meetings and family dinners alike. The smile that said he was about to win something. I slid a folder across the table. His lawyer opened it, read the first page, leaned over and whispered into my brother's ear. My brother's smile didn't disappear all at once. It faded slowly, like a fire running out of fuel, until there was nothing left but a man staring at a table in a conference room in Austin, Texas, realizing the story he had been telling himself for 2 years had just collapsed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started, not the lawsuit, not our mother's death, not even the phone call that changed everything between us. Let me go back to 1988, because that's where the truth lives. I was 26 years old, living in a rented house in Bastrop, Texas, with grease permanently under my fingernails and a dream I couldn't shake. My father worked for the county. My mother was a bookkeeper for a local church. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My younger brother was 17 and already the kind of kid that teachers pulled aside to tell our parents he had a future. Sharp with numbers, quick with words, destined for something better than Bastrop. Everyone agreed. I loved working on cars. Not fixing them the way mechanics do, I mean restoring them. Taking a 1965 Mustang that looked like it had been dragged through a field and giving it back its life. There was something about that process that I couldn't explain to people who hadn't felt it. You were rescuing something. You were refusing to let something beautiful disappear. One evening my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. She pushed a check across the surface. $12,000. I looked up at her. She said, "Your father and I talked about it. Your brother's going to college, probably grad school after that. We can't pay for all of it and stake you at the same time. This is yours, Ray. I know what you're going to do with it. I've seen you in that garage since you were 10 years old. Go build something." I used every dollar. I rented a small shop on the edge of town, bought equipment, and started taking on restoration jobs on nights and weekends, while I kept my day job at an auto parts warehouse. 2 years later, I quit the warehouse. 3 years after that, I hired my first full-time employee. By the time my brother graduated from the University of Texas with his accounting degree and moved to Atlanta for work, I had 4 employees, a growing reputation in the classic car community, and a waiting list 6 months long. I named it Mitchell's Auto Restoration. Over the next 35 years, I built it into something real. Not just real, remarkable. We became known nationally in the collector car world. We restored Ferraris, Porsches, pre-war Packards. We were featured in 3 national magazines. I traveled to shows in Pebble Beach and Amelia Island. I employed 22 people at our peak. The business appraised at $4.5 million the year my mother passed. My brother became a senior partner at an accounting firm in Atlanta. He was good at his work. He made good money. He and his wife had a nice house, 2 kids in private school, vacations in Europe. We talked on the phone once a month, saw each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas. He never once set foot inside my shop, never asked about a single project, never showed the slightest interest in what I'd built. When our mother was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in the spring of 2016, I was the one who drove her to the neurologist. I was the one who sat across from Dr. Patricia Voss in her office in Austin and listened to words like progressive and irreversible and planning ahead. My brother was in Atlanta. He called her on Sundays. Over the next 6 years, I managed everything. Her medications, her finances, the sale of her house when she could no longer live alone, the move to a memory care facility in Cedar Park that cost $6,200 a month. My brother contributed $800 a month. He said his expenses were significant and he was doing what he could. I never pushed back. She was my mother. She passed in February of 2023. She was 81 years old and she went peacefully, which is the only mercy in a disease that takes everything else. 4 months after the funeral, my brother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my office looking over estimates. He said he needed to talk to me about the business. I said, all right. He said that over the years, their mother had told him many times that Mitchell's Auto Restoration was meant to be a family business, that she'd always intended for both her sons to benefit from it. He said she had told him specifically, on multiple occasions, that when the time came, Ray would make it right. He said he wasn't trying to cause problems. He said he just wanted what their mother had promised him. I sat very still for a moment. I said, Derek, I built this business. Mom gave me $12,000 in 1988 as a gift because there wasn't enough money to send us both to college. Everything else, every contract, every restoration, every employee, every dollar of value that came from 35 years of my labor, mine. He said he understood that. He said he respected what I'd built. But Mom had been clear, he said. The business was the family's legacy. He just wanted his half. I said that wasn't going to happen. He said he was giving me a chance to do this the right way before he involved attorneys. I told him to do whatever he felt he needed to do, and I hung up. My wife, Carol, was in the kitchen when I walked in. We've been married 38 years. She took one look at my face and put down the dish towel. I told her what had happened. She didn't say, your brother wouldn't do that, or he's bluffing, or just wait and see. Carol's a practical woman. She said, call Sandra Pruitt first thing tomorrow. Sandra Pruitt had been my business attorney for 15 years. She specialized in commercial litigation and had the kind of calm, methodical approach that made her terrifying in a courtroom. When I explained the situation, she listened without interrupting. Then, she asked one question. Did your mother ever put anything in writing? I said not that I knew of. She said that was actually good news. And then she explained what we were up against. Promissory estoppel, the legal theory that a verbal promise, if specific enough, and relied upon to one's detriment, could be enforced. She said it was a high bar in Texas, but not impossible. She said if my brother could convince a judge that our mother made repeated, specific promises, and that he had structured his life around those promises, we had a fight. Then she said the same thing she would say to me 3 more times over the following months. We need documentation, Ray. Everything you can find. The notice arrived 6 weeks later. My brother was suing me for 50% ownership of Mitchell's Auto Restoration, plus $250,000 in damages representing his theoretical share of profits over the preceding 10 years. The complaint was 47 pages. It described me as someone who had manipulated family resources for personal gain, who had deliberately excluded my brother from a business that belonged to both of us, who had exploited our mother's trust and our father's early death to consolidate control of a family asset. I read it twice. Then I walked out to my shop, put on an apron, and spent 3 hours hand-sanding the passenger door of a 1957 Thunderbird we were restoring for a client in Houston. I needed to do something with my hands. The mediation was scheduled for October, 3 sessions spread over 2 months. The mediator was Earl Whitfield, a retired district court judge from Travis County. He came highly recommended by Sandra. He was fair, she said. He called things as he saw them. The first session was in a conference room in downtown Austin. My brother arrived with his attorney, a man named Garrett Sims, who had done family business litigation in Georgia and apparently knew Texas law well enough to be dangerous. My brother wore a sport coat and looked like he'd spent the morning preparing talking points. Earl Whitfield opened by explaining the process. This isn't a courtroom. Nothing decided here is binding unless both parties agree. My job is to help you find common ground. My brother spoke first. His voice was measured, almost gentle. He said he wasn't there to attack me. He said he respected what I'd built, genuinely. But he said their mother, over the course of many years and many conversations, had been clear about her wishes. The business was the family's. She had told him at Christmas in 2017, at Thanksgiving in 2018, at her birthday dinner in early 2019, that Ray would take care of him, that the business was their legacy, both of theirs. He said he had trusted those words and had made financial decisions based on them. He had turned down partnership opportunities in Atlanta, partly because he believed he had security here, in this family asset, through what their mother had promised. I looked at my brother while he talked. He sounded sincere. That was the hardest part. He sounded like he actually believed what he was saying. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I said that our mother gave me a gift of $12,000 in 1988 to start a business. I said that gift was made in lieu of a college education. The same gift my brother received in the form of tuition, room and board, and graduate school support that my parents stretched themselves to provide. I said that everything Mitchell's Auto Restoration had become was the product of 35 years of my own work. I said my brother had never contributed a single hour, a single dollar, a single decision to that business. And I said that whatever our mother may have said in her later years, those words did not constitute a legal transfer of property. Earl Whitfield nodded slowly. He said he understood both positions. Then he said something that made me uneasy. He said, "Ray, even setting aside the legal question for a moment, is there a moral argument that your brother deserves something? Your mother clearly cared about fairness between her two sons. Doesn't that mean something to you?" I felt Sandra put her hand on my arm under the table. A small pressure. "Be careful." I said it meant a great deal to me. I said I had spent 35 years providing for my family, my employees, and my community. I said I had also spent 6 years and nearly $400,000 ensuring that our mother received the best care available, while my brother sent $800 a month from Atlanta. I said I respected our mother's feelings deeply, but that feelings were not property transfers, and I was not going to surrender half of everything I had built because of conversations that I had never witnessed and could not verify. Garrett Sims said quietly, "That's precisely what a court will decide." The first session ended without movement. That night I sat at the kitchen table with Carol, and we went through what we had. 35 years of tax returns, business incorporation documents from 1991, every loan I had ever taken, all in my name, every payroll record, every contract, every insurance policy, the original check from my mother, dated the 14th of April 1988, which I had found years earlier and kept in a fireproof box, almost like a talisman. I also pulled out a shoebox of old letters. My mother had been a faithful correspondent before email made everyone lazy. Birthday cards mostly, and occasional longer notes. I read through all of them. I found one from 2013, a letter she had written me after Carol and I had our 25th wedding anniversary. She'd come down from Austin for the party. She wrote 2 pages in her neat, careful handwriting about how proud she was, about what a life I had made, about what it meant to her, that I had taken that $12,000 and built something that employed people and created beauty. The second to last paragraph stopped me. She had written, "Mitchell's Auto Restoration is your life's work, Ray. Everything in that shop came from your hands and your vision. Your daddy and I gave you a seed, and you grew a forest. That business is yours in every way that matters. It carries your name, because it is your name." I sat with that letter for a long time. The second mediation session was 2 weeks later. Earl Whitfield seemed to have shifted slightly. He kept using phrases like, "your mother's intentions" and "the spirit of the family arrangement." He asked me whether I had ever offered my brother any stake in the business. He asked whether I had ever discussed succession planning with my family. I felt the room tipping against me. After the session, Sandra was blunt. "Whitfield is leaning toward recommending a settlement. He thinks your brother deserves something. If he makes a formal recommendation and you reject it, that could look bad if this goes to trial. We need something concrete, Ray. A document, a witness, anything that shows your mother understood this business was yours alone." I went home and spent 2 more evenings going through every piece of paper I owned. Then I called Dr. Patricia Voss. She was my mother's neurologist. I had her number from years of appointments. I explained the situation. She was sympathetic, but careful. She couldn't discuss patient records without proper process. Sandra subpoenaed the records the following week. When they arrived, we spent a full afternoon going through them. My mother's mild cognitive impairment had been formally diagnosed in May of 2016. Dr. Voss's notes from that first appointment described moderate, short-term memory loss and early difficulty with complex reasoning. A follow-up in September of 2016 noted that the patient was beginning to conflate past and present. She occasionally spoke of my father in the present tense, even though he had been dead for 11 years. By December of 2016, Dr. Voss had written a clinical note that read, "Patient's family should be made aware that she is no longer capable of making sound financial or legal decisions without assistance. Patient has shown consistent confusion regarding ownership of property and assets. Statements made by patient regarding financial matters should not be considered legally reliable." December of 2016. My brother's claimed promises, the Christmas conversation in 2017, the Thanksgiving dinner in 2018, the birthday dinner in 2019. Every single one of them fell after that note. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. Sandra called it a decisive development, but what she said next was what I kept thinking about. She said, "Ray, did your brother know about the diagnosis?" I thought back. I had been the one at every doctor's appointment. I had been the one managing her medications, her finances, her care transitions. I had told my brother she was struggling. I had said more than once that she wasn't herself. But had I ever sat down and said, "Derek, Mom has been diagnosed with cognitive impairment, and her doctor says she can't make reliable decisions about property and finances." I tried to remember. I couldn't be certain. The third mediation session started with Sandra placing the letter and the medical records on the table before anyone had settled into their chairs. She addressed Earl Whitfield directly. "Before we proceed," she said, "I need to present evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this proceeding." She read the relevant section of Dr. Voss's notes aloud. The date, the clinical finding, the specific language about the patient's confusion regarding property and assets. The room was quiet. She then read the portion of my mother's 2013 letter, written 3 years before any diagnosis, 3 years before any cognitive decline. "Mitchell's Auto Restoration is your life's work, Ray. That business is yours in every way that matters." My brother's attorney, Garrett Sims, was a professional. He recovered quickly. He said a diagnosis of cognitive impairment doesn't automatically invalidate everything a person says. He said people in early stages of decline still have lucid periods, clear days, meaningful conversations. Sandra agreed, and then she laid out the dates. Every single claimed promise fell after December 2016. The December 2016 note didn't just mention impairment. It specifically flagged confusion about property and ownership as a documented symptom. She pulled out additional records from 2017 and 2018 that showed progressive deterioration. The 2018 notes described a mini-stroke in August of that year, 3 months before the Thanksgiving dinner my brother had cited. Then she said something quiet and precise. She said, if Derek believed his mother was making him a binding promise about a $4.5 million business asset, a promise worth millions of dollars, then why didn't he pick up the phone and call Ray? Why didn't he consult an attorney at the time? Why didn't he ask for anything in writing? The answer is that he didn't do any of those things, because on some level, he understood these weren't promises. They were the hopeful, confused words of a woman who loved her son and wanted him to feel safe. Earl Whitfield had been reading the medical records while Sandra spoke. He set them down and took off his reading glasses. He said, Derek, I have to be honest with you. In light of these records, I don't believe I can recommend a resolution in your favor. The evidence shows a clear pattern of cognitive decline beginning before every claimed conversation, combined with the 2013 letter, which demonstrates your mother's clear-headed understanding of the business as Ray's sole creation. I think a court would rule decisively against your position, and if this proceeds to trial, the court will also consider attorney's fees. Garrett Sims leaned over to my brother. They asked for a 15-minute break. My brother and his attorney left the room. Sandra and I sat across from Earl Whitfield. Nobody said anything. I looked out the window at the street below lunch traffic. Ordinary people. A city going about its day completely indifferent to what was happening in this conference room. When my brother came back in, he dismissed his attorney to the hallway. He sat down across from me alone for the first time. He said, I need to say something, and I need to say it without the lawyers in the room. Earl Whitfield looked at me. I nodded. My brother said, I genuinely believed her. Ray, I want you to know that. Every time I visited, she would take me aside in the kitchen, on the porch, wherever, and she would say, "Don't worry, Derek. Ray will take care of you. The business is for both my boys." She said it so consistently, so sincerely. I held on to those words. I held on to them for years. When she passed, I thought, this is the moment. This is when it becomes real. I listened to him without interrupting. He said, "I didn't know about the diagnosis. I knew she was struggling. You told me that. But I didn't understand what it meant medically. I didn't know the doctor had written those things. I didn't know she was that far gone by 2017. I said, I should have explained it more clearly. I was so deep in managing it that it just became my normal. I assumed you knew more than you did." He said, "You shouldn't have had to manage it alone. I know that. I've known that for a long time, and I let myself avoid it because it was easier from Atlanta." I looked at my brother. He was 60 years old. He had some gray at his temples and the beginnings of the same lines our father had had around his eyes. He looked like a man who had just seen something about himself that he didn't like. I said, "You put me through 7 months of hell, Derek. I've spent $74,000 in legal fees. I've lost sleep. I've had my character questioned in a legal document. I've sat in this room and watched a mediator treat me like someone who had stolen from his own family." He said, "I know. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Earl Whitfield cleared his throat. He said that given the medical evidence and the letter, he was formally declining to recommend any financial settlement in Derek's favor. He said if my brother wished to withdraw the lawsuit voluntarily, that was the recommended path. If he chose to proceed to trial, the outcome was, in his view, predictable. My brother's attorney reappeared in the doorway. My brother looked at him, then looked at me. He said, "Drop the case, Garrett." Garrett Sims said he strongly advised discussing it first. My brother said, "It's already discussed. Drop it." On the drive home, Sandra said that was one of the cleaner resolutions she'd seen in a case like this. I thanked her, and she could tell I wasn't celebrating. Carol was waiting when I got home. I told her everything, and she held my hand at the kitchen table the same way she's held it through every hard thing in 38 years. She said, "How do you feel?" I said I had no idea. I said I had won a lawsuit against my own brother, and what I mostly felt was tired. She said, "He wasn't lying, Ray. He really believed it." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it complicated. If he had been purely cynical, if he had just decided to come after my money knowing full well he had no claim, I could be angry and be done with it. But he wasn't. He heard our mother, confused and loving and frightened of her own mind, telling him he would be taken care of. And he wanted to believe it so much that he built an entire legal case on top of it." Carol said, "So what do you do with that?" I didn't have an answer for a while. My brother called 2 days after the mediation ended. He said he wanted me to know he had written a personal check for the difference in my mother's care costs his $800 a month versus a proportional share of the actual expenses. He said he knew it was years late, and he understood if I didn't want it. He said he was going to send it regardless. I told him to keep his money. He said, "Ray," I said, "I'm not ready to talk yet. Give me some time." He said, "All right." Thanksgiving came and went. He sent a card. I sent one back. Carol thought I should call him. I told her I would when I was ready. It took until January. I drove up to meet him in Waco, which was roughly halfway between Austin and where he was visiting family for New Year's. We met at a diner near the highway, ordered coffee and eggs, sat across from each other, the way we used to as kids when our parents took us out for breakfast after church. He asked about the shop. I told him we'd just taken on a 1,969 Camaro for a collector in Dallas. He asked what condition it was in. I said rough, which meant it was perfect. He smiled. He said, "I always knew you were going to be somebody in whatever you did, even when we were kids." I said, "You were the one everybody thought was going somewhere." He said, "Yeah, and look at us. You built something that employs 22 people and will probably outlast us both." I wrote journal articles that maybe 12 people read. I said, "Don't do that. You have 2 kids who love you and a career you've been proud of. That counts for more than you're giving it credit for." He looked out the window. He said, "I spent 2 years convincing myself I deserved something I hadn't earned. That's a hard thing to sit with." I said, "Yeah, it is. I've had to sit with some hard things too." We talked for 2 hours. Not about the lawsuit, mostly. About our father, who'd been gone for 20 years. About the house we grew up in. About the way our mother had made Sunday dinners that neither of us had ever been able to replicate. When we got up to leave, he put his hand out. I shook it. Then, because we're still brothers regardless of everything, I pulled him into a hug. He held on for a moment longer than I expected. In the parking lot, he said, "I'm going to make this right, Ray. Not with money. I know you don't want that. But however I can." I told him we'd figure it out. We're not back to where we were before the lawsuit. I'm not sure we can be. Trust is a strange thing. It doesn't break all at once, and it doesn't heal all at once either. But we talk every other week now. He's visited the shop twice. The second time, I let him sit in the Camaro we'd been restoring. He ran his hand across the dashboard the way people do when they start to understand what the work means. I kept my mother's letter from 2013. It lives in the same fireproof box as the original $12,000 check. On the days when old anger surfaces, and it does, because I'm human and it was a real wound, I take out the letter and read that paragraph again. "Mitchell's Auto Restoration is your life's work, Ray. Everything in that shop came from your hands and your vision." She was right. She knew that. Even as her mind was beginning to slip toward confusion, she knew what I had built, and she knew it was mine. The hardest thing isn't that my brother tried to take it. The hardest thing is understanding why. He had watched me build something real for 35 years, while he lived a life of the mind. Important work, honorable work, but invisible work. No building with your name on it. No employees who've been with you for 2 decades. No customers who drive 3 states to bring you their most prized possession because they trust you more than anyone else. He wanted to matter in the story of something tangible. He just chose the wrong way to do it. I'm 63 years old now. My knees give me trouble in cold weather, and I've started letting my shop foreman, Marcus, handle more of the day-to-day. In 4 or 5 years, I'll probably begin transitioning ownership to him and 2 other senior employees who've earned it. Mitchell's Auto will go on. It'll just have different hands on the wheel. Before I step back, I'm setting up a small scholarship fund through the local community college in Bastrop, the town where I started. $10,000 a year for a student pursuing automotive technology or small business certification. I'm calling it the Rita Mitchell Technical Scholarship, after my mother. My brother asked if he could contribute. I told him yes. There's something right about that. She gave me $12,000 and a belief that work and loyalty meant something. She told me to go build. Out of all the confusion and heartbreak and $74,000 in legal fees, something of her is going forward helping some kid in Bastrop get started the way she helped me get started, back when none of us knew what that check would become. I learned that paper matters more than memory, that love doesn't transfer ownership, that the people you trust most are sometimes the people you need to protect yourself from most carefully, not because they're bad people, but because people are complicated and want things they sometimes can't admit to themselves. I learned that you can forgive someone without forgetting, that you can rebuild a relationship on new ground even when the old ground is gone. And I learned that when your mother looks you in the eye and tells you to go build something, you should write that down. You should keep the letter in a fireproof box. Because 35 years later, in a conference room in Austin, Texas, that letter will be the truest thing in the room.